What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and today's video is all about how to beat the English opening with 1c4. The English opening is might often be very annoying in that they can try to move orders in a d4 opening and avoid our usual defense. So what's the way to punish c4? It's to go e5, and on this game it's going between Evgeny Tomashevsky playing as white against Hikaru Nakamura in the Tiled Tuesday Chess.com Blitz for 2021. And this is a game that has a very surprising ending. You'll definitely want to stay to the end to enjoy it, and also make sure to smash that like button along the way. Now, it's worth noting that white's not limited to playing the move g3, but it's also the case that we can basically play it like a reverse Sicilian with d5, and we see it, we're basically playing an open Sicilian accelerated dragon, but with colors reversed. The great thing is you can play this against quite a lot of different move orders. Let's say if they play knight to c3, we can still put the knight on f6 and play for d5. So if g3, we could still play d5 anyway, like in the game. Or if they play knight to f3, knight to c6, and then play g3, well, still the move d5 is going to work well, and actually is going to transpose back into the game after the obligatory exchange on d5. There are a few moves that white can play to try to dissuade the d5 move. For example, I can play a move like e4 and try to stop it altogether, but then I find that playing bishop b4, and then playing the move d6 and just tucking that bishop back to c5 later to keep a very strong hold over the d4 hole gives like a very comfortable position here. And if you play a move like e3, well, you're not limited to playing the move d5, which it's still playable, but it kind of gives white what he wants with an open sling with extra tempo. So I would suggest playing bishop b4 instead, chopping off that knight on c3, and then preparing d5 in this way, where we defend the pawn on e5 from the attack first of all. And then we play d5 next in order to, well, take the lead in development and even push e4 in some cases to kick that knight with a very healthy position for black. So therefore the move g3 is kind of a move where we're trying to avoid some ideas like bishop b4 by postponing a move knight to c3. But of course we weren't going to play bishop b4 against g3 anyway. We're happy to follow Nakamura with d5. After takes and takes, well, there are some players who like to vary with the move order and play a move like knight to f3, and then try to delay this knight c3 with castles. But we can still play the move knight b6 and not let white get his usual d4 they would dream of playing in these positions. Well, knight b6 stops that, and we can continue with the same step that we're going to see in the game. So after knight c3, this is the move order in the game, and as you saw from before, black can put the knight on b6 and just keep the knight out of harm's way. After the move knight f3, black goes knight c6. And here's where Tomashevsky plays a little bit of an unusual move order. The usual way to play as white would be just to play something like castles, bishop to e7, and now the move of d3 at this point. And here the main line is to play castles and just to develop normally. If they play a3, the move that would be in the spirit of the way Nakamura played in the game would be to simply play a5 and not let white get in b4. I used to think that this move was a bit of a mistake due to allowing the knight to have this square on b5. But it actually turns out to be quite a reasonable alternative to the more explored moves like bishop to e6 and the old line of rook to e8. I mean, bishop e6 is probably the most reliable equalizer, but it's quite a bit more work as well, we might add. And if they do play bishop e3, then yeah, just bishop e6. It's going to be fine for black. Again, being a3 of a5 is actually going to transpose to something very similar to the game. Well, instead, white played the move rook to b1, and in that case, well, rook b1 is very committal because it tells black that white is going for the move b4 at any price. So now by playing the move a5, basically Nakamura is saying, well, if you can't get in b4, your rook looks kind of silly on b1 here. So the game continued d3. Black played bishop to e7. It is true the bishop would be more active on c5, but e7 is a very solid square, playing in a very classical style with bishop e3, castles. And now a very interesting move by Nakamura in the move f5. Now, normally in these positions, you play to move bishop e6 before f5. I think that might have been slightly more precise to not allow a queen to b3, which can sometimes be a bit annoying when your king is still on g8. So that's why I think this is a slightly more precise move order. But, okay, still f5 is very much playable. And white didn't really find a good way to punish it in the game. I mean, maybe white's going to take on b6. Like, that's a question that's probably come to your mind, like, why isn't white simply taking this knight, leaving black with the doubled pawns and white effect with an extra pawn? Well, it's not quite that simple. After queen b3 and king h8, we do see that black does have a very nice bishop pair, and we could see that bishop come some very nice diagonals potentially. But however, in this case, I think white can go queen d5. I think that the exchange of the queens does kind of help white to get after this pawn. It's definitely something that can be explored, though I do think the black should still be doing fine in this position as well. But in the game, Tomashevsky played rook to c1, and that kind of admits that rook b1 probably wasn't the most precise move order for white beforehand, that perhaps he should have delayed this move and played a3 instead. So if black goes a5, you can go rook c1 in one go for a better version of what white gets in the game. So black played bishop e6, just stopping any queen to b3. And now a typical plan for white would be to play a move like knight a4, and try to get the knight to c5 to pressure that pawn on b7. But here black is in time to also play some resource of his own. You might notice one disadvantage of putting the knight on a4 is that you've left the e4 square less well defended. So that gives black extra options like playing e4 and hitting back in the center. And there are other moves well like bishop d5 and f4 that would also be quite reasonable. So the position is kind of easy to play for black when you've got all the space on the board, right? Well, white played the move a3 instead, and I think that actually this is your chance to try and improve on Nakamura's play. What would you play if you were black in this position? And while you're thinking about it, do make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated with more of my Grandmaster videos. Also to like it if you've been enjoying the videos so far and if you've learned something new. Well, maybe even put your move that you would play in the comments. And if you're going to play the move king h8, then congratulations. I think this is the most precise move in the position. The computer also thinks that the pawn sack of a4, just not caring about them taking, is also an interesting idea, but king h8 does seem more solid. Well, black played bishop f6, maybe hoping to get in an e4 one day and open up the bishop. But I do think this move's a little bit imprecise, because after knight d2, well, if white could get a knight to c5, it sort of is a bit annoying that we don't have the bishop to sort of recycle to relieve the pressure on the queen side. Because after move rook b8, I mean, it's a very standard plan for white in the Sicilian defense to bring that knight towards c4 with black, or in this case c5 with cards reversed. And I think that if white goes knight to b3, well, the knight c5 is going to tie black's rook to the defense of the pawn. Also, another point to keep in mind is that after knight c5, white will often be threatening to take on b7 and then win a pawn with knight c6. These factors do give white a little bit of an initiative, though I think after knight d5 and taking, it's still probably positioned only somewhat worse for black and not necessarily losing, as it were. Actually, maybe I'd take that back. I think that this move rook c5 would be kind of annoying, where it sort of shows the disadvantage of playing a5, that you might end up losing that pawn and not quite getting enough compensation for it. So yeah, knight b3 would ask some tough questions, and it may well be the best option would be to play bishop e7 and kind of admit the mistake and lose 2 tempi, but of course it's not really the way black would like to play it ideally. But instead, Nakamura's play got rewarded because white played bishop b6, which I do think is a little bit of a strategic mistake, because I do think in this rising structure, even though white can try to put the knights on b5 and c4, they don't really threaten anything, and black can kind of just ignore them and hit back in the center with a move like e4, which is a break you very often see in these lines to push, to activate the bishop and to hit white in the center. In fact, after the move in game queen a4, I actually think that the move e4 would have been a very interesting possibility, using the fact that d4 would drop the knight to queen takes d2. Now, of course, white is not forced to take the pawn, and there are moves he can play like rook d1, with the idea of being ed3 with knight f3 and using the pin to get the pawn back. Nonetheless, I think that the opening of the center does work in black's best interest here. Actually, you can even play the move d takes e2 and give up the queen for the 2 rooks, which would be quite nice for black in that case. Well, it could be explored further. It's not the end of the story, but I do think that e4 would be a very good alternative to the move played in the game of rook to c8, which, to be fair, should also be quite decent, but it does give white some extra options. One very interesting idea is actually to play e3, with the idea that if black does take the pawn, you can go rook fd1, and suddenly that queen after knight d4 could start suddenly running out of good squares to go to. And if black does try to move the queen to safety, say it goes to d8 for example, then yeah, white can play moves like knight d4, and you can't see a knight coming in at d6, and yeah, white might have given up the a pawn, but he's got absolute domination and really taken over the initiative in return. But okay, this is something I think that neither of the players saw in the game, and instead after knight c4 we see Tomashevsky basically, fall down the path of no return, where he has no escape from what is about to befall him. Well, this also points to if you can find a key move for black as well. Can you play like Hikaru Nakamura as black here? Well, congratulations if you came up with the move of knight to d4. And the idea of knight d4 is that we're actually setting up a lot of nasty tactics. Let's say, for example, if white takes that pawn with bishop takes b7, we can actually even play a move b5 at this point. And the idea of b5 is that, well, if they don't take that pawn with knight b5, we're going to take their knight on the next turn. But after knight takes b5, we can play knight e2. And we see it after king g2 and rook b8 that the position is kind of falling apart for white because this rook is under attack and, well, the bishop is under attack at the same time. And if you play rook ce1 and you try to get the material back with takes and rook takes e2, well, black just goes queen takes d3, and even though the material is currently equal, there's a double attack here that basically is costing white material. Or if he tries to cover everything with rook c2, you just go bishop to d5, or even just rook b5 is probably even simpler actually, where he's used the fact the queen is overloaded to pick up a full piece with queen takes b5 and then queen takes c2. So since bishop b7 does seem to be working, it means that already the play has gone very wrong for white. And the move for queen d1 played by Tomashevsky didn't really help, because after b5, the white knight doesn't have a very good square. In fact, this is a position where Tomashevsky resigned, and that might seem like a very premature decision initially, but actually it does turn out that white has simply lost here. So let's have a quick look as to why, so that we're all on the same page. If white plays a move like, let's say, knight b5, obviously we are covering that with the knight. If white plays a knight retreat like knight d2, well, now the move b4 shows up the whole problem for white. After a takes b4, a b4, obviously allowing that knight to be taken is not really in white's best interest. You know, bishop b7, rook c7 is hitting the bishop and hitting the knight at exactly the same time. But if you play a move like knight a4 to try to save your knight, the problem is that you've got rook takes c1 here, queen c1, and then knight e2 is just winning the queen with this nasty knight fork. And if you do try to counterattack with a move like b3 instead, well, this is a better try, but after b takes c4, e takes d4, e takes d4, we see that black is up a full pawn here, and after knight 2 and b5, black's got not just the pawn, but he's got the space, he's got the bishops. All the good positional advantages pretty much ensure that black will win really without too much trouble at this point. So yeah, that's how Nakamura beat Tomashevsky, a 2-7-9 plus grandmaster and past Russian champion, in just 17 moves with the black pieces. And if he can beat a top GM with them against when they played move c4 with this sort of line, I think that your chance of a good result playing c4, e5, and this reverse Sicilian approach, you know, with e5, g3, and then going for the quick d5, well, I think your chances of success here are definitely pretty good. So as always, do make sure to leave a comment below with your thoughts on the video. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe to stay updated. And yeah, good luck against the English in your games, and I will see you in the next video or for the next opening that we're going to beat.